Hello, everyone. Welcome in. We're glad to have you all here today. We have myself and Austin here from Outdoor Living Supply. I'm here representing the Acelab team. So while we let everybody trickle in, I want to quickly go over a few things before we get started officially. First and foremost, I want to show you all where you can learn a little bit more about outdoor living supply on Acelab. So let's pull this up a little bit. All right. So anytime you're looking to do some research on manufacturers in Acelab, and there's a few different ways you can do that. One of them being using the search bar at the top of the screen. So you can search for any specific manufacturer or product. Um, and now on their page, we've got some great information. We've got Austin's contact information right here. We also have some video. Uh-oh, looks like the video is not working right now. Probably should look into that. Anyways, the important part is right here where we've got our products for you to explore. So, any of the products you're learning about today, you can click into here. You can get more information within the actual product page. You can also save it to your firm library right here. That way you have it for future reference. So again, I have a lot of great information for you to explore here. So I'll drop this page in the webinar chat, so that way you can reference that. Couple other things to make note of. We will be doing Q&A today towards the end. So if at any point during the presentation you have a question, all you need to do is drop it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So you can click that and type in your questions. You'll also see a poll pop up during the webinar. So closer to the end of the presentation, you'll see that pop up on your screen. It is an optional poll. So if you're not interested in getting any kind of follow-up information after today's presentation, you can just click the X on that box that pops up and it'll go away. However, if you are interested in getting connected with Austin and his team, all you have to do is just fill that out. You'll get an email within a couple days after today's webinar. It'll be coming from a no reply Acelab. It's really just a notification to let you know you have a new conversation in your Acelab account. So you can actually respond directly to that email to get in touch with their team. Or you can just log into your Acelab account and you'll be able to find all the conversations there and respond there. It's a great way to get any other specific questions answered and get connected with their team. So we encourage you to do that. Last but not least, we do have a post-webinar survey. So feel free to fill it out, share any feedback that you have. We greatly appreciate it. And actually one other thing too, this is an AIA-approved presentation. So we collected your numbers upon registration. So you're most likely already all set there. If you're worried we didn't get your AIA number, I'll drop a form in the chat as well. You can fill that out and make sure that you get credit for today's presentation. And that is my last note to make. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Austin.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's get this pulled up real quick.
Yeah, I can see your screen already. It looks like you're good to
You
go.
can? Okay, perfect. That'll look okay on everyone's side? Okay.
Yes, looks great.
Perfect, thank you. Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to learn all about adhered manufactured stone. If you've had the opportunity, I've done a couple of presentations prior to today, and they've all been heavy on natural stone. The nice thing about in this presentation, there's a lot of similarities between whether it's installation for manufactured stone and natural stone, best practices for both uses and both products. And so you'll see a lot of overlap and a lot of similarities. But when looking at how the adhered manufactured stone world and industry has evolved, it's very similar to that of natural stone and how far they've come, the technologies, what they've improved on, just really how well they've made it look. And in a lot of cases, when looking at natural stone or a manufactured stone on a lot of homes, it's pretty hard to tell the difference now between the naked eye unless maybe you get closer to the product. And so we'll go through this today. talking about in this sense of adhered manufactured stone and all of the cool benefits and uses that it has. So for your knowledge about the course, you can see on the left side who's the provider of it, the credit you can get for it, the description for itself. It's going to explore the product composition I mentioned of adhered manufactured stone. We will discuss basic architectural details of installing adhered manufactured stone. We'll talk about industry recommended installation and techniques of adhered manufactured stone, or AMSV. So just know that's that acronym. Participants will gain insight into material selection, specification considerations, and best practices to ensure long-term durability and aesthetic integrity. So the four main learning objectives for today that we'll go through. We'll understand the product composition that I mentioned of adhered manufactured stone veneer. We'll talk about critical product quality factors and aesthetic characteristics of AMSV and how it's essential during this or the specification process. We will utilize proper architectural details when designing with AMSV. And then we'll always talk about following industry recommended best practices for adhered manufactured stone veneer and its installation. So going down to its base form, I talk about that with either natural stone and now with manufactured stone. What is it? What's it made of? How does it come to be? It's lots of different pieces. And so when you talk about the processes and what goes into it, everything that is engineered or done is made to mimic that of a natural stone while doing both the beauty of lightweight and versatility to be an alternative option for a lot of cases. Every piece, the base ingredient is using cement. There's lightweight aggregates that go into it, air entraining and concrete admixtures as well, different mineral oxide and coloring pigments to give it that natural look and to keep its original color long lasting. There's reinforcement fibers that are put in, and then other components as well to get it to its final state of kilning it or curing it, as a lot of other products go through. And then the materials are wet cast into their shapes, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. But it's all done in that to mimic of natural stone, whether it's its texture, its look, its length, its depth, its finish, all of the different things that go into it. Natural stone is taken as its byproduct. And so when talking about the mineral oxide pigments, how that goes in, you can see the photo on the right. The dyes, everything just are there to provide that natural range of color for adhered manufactured stone. It penetrates that material, it gets deep into it to where that color composition is more consistent and long lasting throughout it. And that helps it with resistance to fading and things like that over time, being a man made product. When looking at some of the key aspects, whether it's product quality or aesthetic of a manufactured stone, there's a lot of things to consider. And you want the product to come out looking natural as can be. You want to be happy with its final state installed. And so when looking at whether it's the colors, the textures, the profiles, manufacturing standards for the product, the elements of what they get from this manufactured stone, they take directly from nature. So you'll see either color palettes or finishes or waves. They will make molds out of natural stones from different regions. And so I've been able to talk with the owner who put on this presentation, and they go to different regions quite meticulously, and they see either Rocky Mountain regions, Southwest regions, Mid-Atlantic regions, wherever it may be, even outside the US, they take in the aesthetic of its natural surrounding and they apply it to an adhered manufactured stone veneer. And so, just as with natural stone, the artistry, the skill, the meticulous work that goes into it, the same thing is done with manufactured stone. And being able to accomplish what you see on the photo on the right is really neat. And with a natural stone, I would argue would be next to nearly impossible in most instances and would just not be feasible for most projects. But being able to mimic that, take a product, a man-made use, mold it, craft it, and install it, but still have the look of a very unique, either natural stone byproduct or appearance that will last for a very long time. And so, talking about those molds, you can see here on the right, very similar to that of when I think of candy in a big mold in a fire and kiln, and they take out all the products and all the sweets and the treats. This is very similar in how they pour it, they put the silicone molds in, they cure, and depending on how many molds, you can have really an endless array of sizes and shapes and textures to make sure there's not repeating patterns. There's not one similar face texture that looks exactly like the one next to it. All of that is continuously naturally reoccurring in an adhered manufactured stone. Probably the biggest thing to consider, whether looking at a product or a manufacturer and you're looking for a manufactured stone for a project, being aware of how often they change out their molds. Do they put a lot of time and effort into making sure they're high quality, they're not worn down over the years? Because that can affect how the product's finished look will be. If the mold is older and probably needs replaced, you might have a little bit less of that diverse, not unified look. Whereas a newer mold continuously being monitored and replaced, the investment is well worth it to keep the brand and to keep the product looking as good as it can be. So showing a little bit of that in action, we showed that mineral oxide and the pigments that go in. You can see they're doing just that here in these molds and these casts. They vibrate them to make sure they remove the air pockets inside of them. They are stacked for curing, and then AMSV is demolded within approximate 24-hour time period, and then it is packaged. And so it's a relatively quick process, and once you get the hang of it, it can be pretty seamless and efficient, just as Natural Stone has done in their process and in their industry. Manufactured Stone is doing just the same in pumping out the product in the most timely and efficient manner. And so one thing to note when talking about manufactured stone is it meets, ASTM requirements for any type of testing. These are just the minimum requirements for manufactured stone, whether it's compressive strength, whether it's shrinkage, whether it's weight per square foot, flexural strength, or modules of rupture, all of those things, freeze thaw, manufactured stone meets that and should meet that. And so I wouldn't say a source that you're getting the net or the manufactured stone is not going to be compliant with this, but just something to check to be aware of depending on the climate and the region that you live in. Some products maybe are going to test a little bit better than other manufactured stones. And so, just as with natural stone, when you look at manufactured stone, they want to relive the history of whether it was quarried in a local area and made to mimic that of its surrounding. And when I mentioned tying in the product to its geological area, its style, its cohesive aesthetic in that region, they aim to do just that. And so, as we're aware of, many structures were built using natural stones that were unearthed during the site excavation. Manufactured stone does that to just carefully select the profiles, the sizing, the textures, all of that to strengthen design themes and to match the area it's put in or the project that you're wanting to achieve. I'm preaching to the choir on this one, but when you see different styles, different patterns, you know that they can create different warmths, different feels, different designs in your projects. If it's a rustic profile you're trying to go for, it can create a more warm and inviting space. And in this sense, a manufactured stone can do just that. And I like to highlight just showcasing they decided to do a pretty heavy grout on this manufactured stone, more of a more random, kind of mosaic-ish cobbly look. Depending on how you finish the grout, depending if you go for more of a dry stack application, it can completely change the look and appearance of the stone. And so you're all very aware of this, but just as natural stone can have the same effect, a manufactured stone can do just that in creating those environments and those spaces that we all want to be inviting. Talking about more modern profiles and textures that you can get, something really unique that the manufactured stone industry has pushed towards and achieved is much larger format textures and styles with their stones. And so before that was a lot harder to achieve, quality, whatever it may have been that was limiting them. Now, the technologies, the molds, the processes have enabled them to offer more styles and a lot larger, wide variety of ranges. And so maybe as before, you can only get with a natural stone. Now, a manufactured stone can also achieve that look, whether rustic or whether modern, as shown in this photo. And then, similar to that, stone profiles are all about authenticity for their scale. Larger profiles can be used to replicate indigenous stone types. So, whether unearthed during the excavation site, whether from a creek nearby that was done many, many years ago that they used for retaining walls, whether structural or aesthetic, manufactured stone can mimic that and can give you that look and achieve that result that maybe you weren't able to do now, but we can make it for you in the sense of a man-made stone. So similar to the rustic warm photo, the authentic sizes and colors deliver that perfect blend. And so the stones are skillfully blended with sizes ranging above 15 inches. Uh, that's quite a big achievement in terms of width and size and scale. And that helps you really create that diverse and unique profile range that we all want to have, or depending on the project, the customer yourself is trying to lean towards a manufactured stone. And as you see on that back wall, can do just that. And then properly crafted AMSV provides natural color palettes to enhance your project. So there's areas of overgrout or more of a whitewash look. There's areas a little more uniform, whatever it is, mix and match, one or the other. Either or can be done and installed using a manufactured stone. And then something that's really neat when you talk about larger corners, it's kind of the center of your project in a lot of ways that people want to see a large corner piece that gives it its structural integrity look. And so natural stones and man-made stones can do just that. And it provides a cool look, not structural in this sense, but it gives that appearance of maybe older times of how they used to use them for that purpose. Now we can apply it in a less structural use, but still give the same aesthetic and look using a manufactured stone. And then soft white colors, they brighten the interiors. You can see more of a limestone mimic that they're trying to achieve instead of maybe the overgrout or the whitewash from that other rustic warm photo. A little more nominal, a little more uniform type of look on this fireplace, and it looks great. And so either or of those products can be changed or manipulated and can really create a different feel and a different environment from how it's installed. So the next few slides are going to talk about proper architectural detailing of AMSV. One thing to note is much of it, like I mentioned early on, is super similar, if not almost copycat of that of a natural stone and how it's installed. It'll go through different substrates, different types of applications, different best practices. The biggest thing to note, your installer or your subcontractors are the people that should be following these best practices. If there's questions or if there's design or details in your specs, these are really great resources to have as a frame of reference or an ability to be clear on the front end of the product, making sure nothing is lost in translation, it's installed correctly, and the finished product looks great for many years to come. So we'll go through some examples of those. And if there's ever a need to share or to have these cross sections, happy to share any of this information with you. So first we'll talk about wood substrates. Again, I'm sure you're very familiar and have seen this in one way or another. Looking at the basics of how to install really both a man-made stone and a natural stone. The biggest point of emphasis I always like to share with people is too many layers is really never a bad thing. And in the case of whether it's your water retention barrier, your lath, what type of mortar you use, obviously having a great scratch coat for that mortar to adhere and stick to the stone and be as one unit. Whatever you do that seems like overkill to avoid issues later on, I think you're going to love that you did it on the front end. And so, talking about the main factor when looking at a natural stone and anything adhered to any type of substrate is making sure water is directed away from behind it. You have the weep screed that can push that water out through that water channel of either a rain screed to help funnel all that water out behind it if water does happen to get pushed in through it. But lots of other things that go to make sure water is a little bit of the nemesis when it comes to this. But as long as you're installed properly and shown here on this cross section, there should be no issues with the stone popping off or delaminating anytime soon. Similar to that, when you look at maybe a concrete masonry unit or a CMU, a lot of masons or installers will apply stone directly onto a CMU. You can do that. It's not like it's not allowed. There's best practices that maybe would say put a metal lath on, have that substrate cleaned, and have that barrier that you know is not contaminated, or maybe there's mold or whatever type of elements that have been on that masonry unit for many, many years. It's probably a best practice to know that your lath is going to be that solid substrate piece to stick onto and it won't be contaminated. But again, depending on the region, depending on the area that you're in, there's lots of best practices that are just fine and can achieve your same result. This is just one option here to showcase a great best practice, really in any instance, to make sure the product will adhere and stay on in the sense of a CMU. Looking at AMSV with use of wind screening, Again, similar to that of what I've discussed so far, everything when I think about what's the main takeaway, what's the thing you want to know about for either a windscreen use, this substrate, or that type of substrate, it's making sure the proper layers are installed, the water is directed properly away from that substrate or from the stone, and almost everything else will fall into place with your best practices. Similar to that of cladding transitions, um, just making sure again, all of those same cross sections are very similar to that of what's been discussed upon what layers, upon rain screen funnels, your water resistive barriers, your lath, all of these things just help keep that substrate, keep your product golden for many years and not having any phone calls later on about stone falling off. So just showing another angle on this side point of the cladding transition, as well as a wall assembly transition. Anything that you need from details on this, um, they have great resources that can showcase how to install it, what's a good practice for your region, what type of testing maybe is recommended, what type of mortar is important to note as well, depending on non-structural or structural. A lot of great resources that can help dictate this in greater detail for your specific projects. Foundation wall base, looking at overlapping foundation. So great cross section to see that. And then AMSV continuing down wall. Also another good resource to see how's the best resource installing this, how many inches above the ground should the stone be, where should the weep screed be and pushing out that water, all of that. Similar to that, what we talked about, but a good visual representation to also see again. Okay, so looking a little bit more at some proper architectural details of AMSV, showing a little bit about on the right photo for a foundation wall base that we just looked at, noting keeping it above the ground. I believe it's 2 inches is the minimum. Um, I believe 4 inches. I think it varies a little bit for your areas, but those are just good things to know, whether water is going to be pooling there, water is going to be collecting. Just noting no casing and being familiar that depending on where you're at, some architectural designs or elements you want to achieve might not be recommended per some of the standards that we see here, depending on the installation of the product or of the AMSV. Looking at window head, again, very similar as we've showcased, talking about proper flashing, all those different things, bedding sealant under window fin. Uh, there's a lot of variances that can come in how the project is going to be finished when installed, making sure that the stone is not an afterthought for the product or the project and something else causes an issue later down the line, just great to be aware of on the front end. And so whether it's the installer or whether it's yourself and maybe natural stone or veneer is not their super specialty, this would be a great way to educate, showcase a little bit about the benefits of making sure this is done properly the first time and that they don't have to have a callback to come back and refix something because they tried to maybe cut corners with some of the installation of this stone, especially around a window head where you have a lot of water that can usually run off. Looking at the proper flashing of and that of water diversion, detailing with proper flashings at roof lines are critical in avoiding leaks and water damage to building structures. Natural stone or manufactured stone same thing. Having that proper flashing that pushes that water away from the stone, from the mortar, having everything sloped correctly to get that water just as far away from it as possible, but in a very efficient manner. Talking about a rain screen funnel, if you haven't seen a video of how it's done, I highly recommend looking at it. It's a very unique process of just channeling that water between the substrate and the stone and having it pop out at the bottom of that water or that weep screed. And it works great. It's just a great resort, a great best practice to make sure even if there is water that gets behind the product or the manufactured stone, it's not going to cause any issues to its actual adhesion to the substrate. Typical wall frame section with continuous rigid insulation. I know this was something in Phoenix. I had this presentation and that was a question that was brought up in their area, something applicable to them, something that they do or had a question on. This is a great resource to see how that's done, what's a best practice for installing it in a continuous rigid insulation use. All of this you can see how AMSV as well as any really ASTM testing, how they recommend that you install it. So more proper installation of AMSV and looking at more project photos. Talking about that CMU I mentioned, the metal lath needs to be sulfured and galvanized. The biggest reason for that is corrosion and rust. That's something we don't want to have happen to your lath. So making sure it is a galvanized metal is a big importance for adhering any product, whether man-made or natural. It's recommended to be fastened to the wall before applying AMSV over poured concrete substrates. Again, similar to that of whether it's mold, whether it's residue, the surface is just not going to have as great of a bond to the product as it will with the metal lath involved. So again, a best practice to be aware of and to use and recommended for really any use or any climate, just to avoid, like you can see, agents or anything that's slick, whatever you may have missed, the metal lath can negate that by being installed beforehand. And then just a note, direct application of AMSV without metal lath may create that improper bond and could lead to delamination of your stone. So not saying it will or it can or it will happen, but it's a greater likelihood that later down the road, maybe something could delaminate if not installed with a metal lath. Preparing the wood substrate with WRB or that water resistive barrier, making sure it's all compliant with ASTM testing, in this case for D226. The upper layer of the WRB should lap over the lower layer by a minimum of 2 inches, and the vertical joint should be lapped a minimum of 6 inches. It's good to just have a little bit of that overlap, whether it's, you think about weed barriers or areas, you just want to make sure there's no contaminants or no outside influence that can get between a small overlap that could possibly come apart. It could separate slightly, settling, you name it. This can just eliminate any issue of that later on by having that minimum overlap. And then inside and outside corners must be overlapped by a minimum of 16 inches past the corner in both directions. So again, the same thing, trying to make sure that water resistive barrier is resisting water at all corners with enough give and enough play for a few inches on either side. You can see here a rain screen being installed on that upper half and what that looks like to the water resistant barrier. So kind of cool to see it's nice to see it through the process and realize all this stuff really is underneath and existing on most homes. And just as with a natural stone, just a little tidbit, being able to see a manufactured stone come from where it's installed, go through a plant tour, going through a quarry tour. It just helps put a lot of things into perspective. And so, if you haven't had the opportunity, or if you have, I recommend trying to do either study tours or tours of these plants as much as you can. They're really informational and they're a great way to learn about the product you're specing and really how it's used and why it is the way it is. And all the things that I say as well and why they recommend that. And you get a lot of credit hours if you go and attend, and that's another bonus. So looking at that self-furring metal lath or that galvanized metal lath, the installation should be in accordance with ASTM testing. The metal lath must also meet that. It should be applied horizontally, perpendicular to framing, so up and down, and should overlap a minimum of 1 inch at the vertical seam. So similar to that of your water resistant barrier, just want to have a slight overlap of your metal lathing as well. And then a minimum of 1/2 inch at horizontal seams. Vertical seams should be staggered, and metal lath should be wrapped around inside and outside corners by a minimum of 12 inches. So all of it, best practices, making sure maybe even be a little extra cautious and having a little bit extra wraparound. If you're a little unsure or something's not quite sitting well, the installer should be very aware of that. But in case maybe you do see something later down, might be a good thing to identify to have practiced at the next project. Mortar recommendations, that's something I touched on a little bit. You have really three types that are listed here in this chart. Type N, the easiest way to remember type N is it is non-structural mortar. Type S mortar is structural mortar. And then ANSI, A118.4 or ANSI A118.15 is probably the cream of the crop for the types of mortar that you would use. I liken it to that of your Laticrete products, and being revered is just a really good product to use in any application. So depending on the types of mortar and what you use can have a big effect on the structural integrity, the bond, the adhesiveness of the product. And so showcasing the differences of either or, if it ever came down the line of what product or what mortar was specified incorrectly, you could then point that back to, well, the stone actually delaminated because they didn't use the correct mortar for that product. So great table to have as a great resource to see and to have as a reference, and a great little piece of knowledge as well when seeing it installed. Talking about a mortar scratch coat, the biggest thing about why a scratch coat is applied is it just is acting as that extra anchor. So when I think about the claw marks, in my analogy, if there's a smooth surface, pretty hard to really grip anything. As soon as you have a scratch coat, there's more grippage, there's just more area to work with for texturing and having resistance or a greater slip coefficient in that sense. And so why they apply a scratch coat to a mortar is to do just that, is to help bond with the stone that you see here being installed, and to make sure that it is all one continuous unit with that of hopefully their lath underneath, the water resistive barrier, and then ultimately up against their substrate. The scratch coat should cure for a minimum of 24 hours. What type of coating and where you are can affect what time of day you should be installing stone, what temperature you should be installing it at. You never want your scratch coat to completely dry. It won't stick as well to the stone. You want it to have a pretty nice wet look to it, but not oversaturated. And then, yeah, I'm seeing right here, it should be dampened using a spray bottle to prevent a flash bond, which would really just not allow it to adhere, and the mortar would be too dry to stick to. So another good thing to just be aware of with why they do scratch coats for applying natural stone. Yeah. Apply a full bed of mortar to the back. This is probably the biggest thing that unfortunately people will try to maybe skimp out on a little bit or not do enough of. After the back of the stone is cleaned, you know, dust, whatever it may be, it's a damp, wet rag that you'll wipe that right off. Make sure the entire back piece of that stone, manufactured or not, is completely covered with mortar. You want that full surface area to have, I like the 3 points of contact rule when it's being adhesive or installed, and not having it entirely coated on the back of the product is what could cause things like delamination over time, watering down the mortar, trying to extend it when they should have just gotten more mortar. All those couple of little things can just cause issues later down the line. So, a good rule of thumb to always cover it entirely with mortar on the back. Liquid applied air and moisture barrier. Liquid applied air and moisture barriers are available as a part of a complete AMSV installation system from various polymer modified mortar manufacturers. Generally, 2 coats of these barriers are required. So, again, another way that you can help mitigate moisture, um, retain it, or get it away and keep it away from having any issues with your stone or your substrate. Um, AMSV can be installed over cement board. So, a lot of reasons or a lot of uses that make AMSV a great option is because it's lightweight. It's under that 15 pounds per square foot to be classified as a veneer. And so you can put it in a lot of different areas and you can mimic that. You don't need really brackets and fasteners and a lot of those things that some full bed natural stones really do need. And so that makes it a little bit versatile in how you can install it. When using a cement board, only modified mortars complying with that of ANSI should be used as that setting bed mortar. Don't use those conventional mortars like mentioned, either type S or type N, for a cement board installation. And then there's a 4-inch wide alkali resistant board, fiberglass mesh. Tape should be used over the exterior joints of the cement board sheets. And 2-inch wide alkali resistant fiberglass mesh tape should be used over the interior joints. And then wood sheathing is required behind cement board when the sheathing is structural. So if there's a project or a use where this sees fit or applicable, please let me know. And I'm happy to connect or get you in contact with whoever can make this in simpler terms or explain any details that you need on this. And then again, installing AMSV with a polymer modified mortar. They must comply with both ANSIs that have been mentioned. Polymer modified mortars do have a higher bond strength. So if that's a project where you want as much bond strength stickiness as possible, then this would be a mortar that you should use. And then mortars complying with this, they're recommended for applications over 10 feet. So really anything probably exterior over 10 feet definitely would use this type of mortar, especially being outside in the elements. And then generally a drill mixing paddle is recommended to mix that mortar up, very similar to how they mix regular mortars, either type N or type S. So kind of cool, showcasing the two that we looked at, either the cement board or the wood sheathing, just showcasing that cross section again. Really good frame of reference to see how they do it and how it's installed. But most importantly, as emphasized, follow the specific manufacturer's recommendations for any type of these applications to help make your projects be a legacy for your firms or for yourself. Something I've also talked about, grout joints complement and can change your project entirely. The left photo, thicker grout, right photo on the top right, more of a dry stack, similar to that of the bottom photo, fireplace, more of a dry stack application. How the stone will turn out, how it will look, can really change its appearance, whether rustic, aged, all of those different things, more modern, can be achieved by the types of grouts and joints that you use. Seeing it installed and installing grout joints, kind of basic knowledge, but using a grout bag, select your desired mortar color to create your grout joints. Generally it's white or grays, but there's a few other grout joints out there that I'm learning about. And so, depending on how you want it to be and to look, use this to properly fill those grout joints. Allow them to partially set, push them using a metal striking tool. Once they set up, completely shape the joints and then just brush away any remaining mortar from those joints. Tight fit. So depending on how you need it, striking level chalk lines. This is a best practice for really any either hardscape or in this case manufactured stone installation best practice. That just helps make sure your project is not going to have some weird wonkiness to it once it's installed and it has the look and the feel and transition that you wanted it to be after it's installed. And then cleaning products, this is a good thing to know for the homeowners once it's installed. For a manufactured stone, we'd recommend using mild detergent, soft brush to clean it. Don't power wash it. The biggest thing, manufactured stone is still man-made, and depending on how it's aged um, and how it's maybe looked on one side over the years, you could slightly maybe take off that pigment color. You could slightly, scratch it or mark it, just like a cement could be marked when power washing it. And so only use things that you see that will be gently agitating, uh, removing it promptly, but not maybe too aggressively when trying to clean it a little bit. And then I've mentioned this too, but just be mindful of the time of season, the time of day that it's being installed. If it's a colder afternoon or a colder day, a mortar's not going to cure as much. You generally need it to be about 40 degrees or greater. You don't want to have it rain for about 24 hours. And just confirming that, your subcontractor with the installers, just making sure those are all up to speed and it doesn't pinpoint back on yourself for any reason that this was all made clear and you knew that this should not have been done if it was done properly. And so there's all these details I always mention to people. If you need a complete AMSV detailing and installation guide, CMHA is a great resource for offering anything that you need concrete related and hardscapes related, and they can really get you detailed drawings, cross sections, you name it, so that you can have and that you can put into your projects if needed for certain projects that you're maybe not as familiar with. Okay, and that's the end of the presentation for today. So thank you so much. I hope you learned a little bit about manufactured stone or just solidify to you that manufactured stone and natural stone are very similar and how they are installed, but both best practices can be a huge benefit to understand for their applications. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Austin. All right. Well, we have a little bit of time for questions. So, if there's any questions that you didn't get answered, feel free to drop those in the Q&A now, but we'll go ahead and get us started here. Um, First we have, is it practical to use lath and that is not metal?
Great question. I would love to know what kind of lath you are using that's not metal. If it's not metal, I would just say the durability side would be the only thing that I would maybe look into a little bit. And it really comes down to exterior or interior application. If it's an interior application, you're probably fine, and you're not going to maybe have things like rust that I mentioned happen to the lath. But if it's an exterior use, it's in the elements, it's in maybe a little bit more of a harsher climate, I would stick to the galvanized metal for lath just as a best practice and what CMHA is kind of given their stamp of approval for.
Nice. All right, next we have, what is the recommended optimal panel size and thickness?
Great question. Depending on the panel size, I have seen really big panels, and depending on if it's more of a bracket system or however it may be, their thickness can get pretty thick. I assume probably for this application, you're talking a little bit more maybe residential or commercial, but panel sizing, I generally see no bigger than I've never seen like a bigger than like a 48 by 48. That's really big. But generally I see probably in that 2 to 3 foot range as people want larger formats or sizes. Thickness wise, it varies, depending on what they want or the look. Um, Dowel tile is actually a really great reference for different types of thicknesses or uses that they have. And so, depending on what the project is and what you need, I mean, they can be 2 cm, they can be 4 cm. It just varies a little bit, but I would say in those two ranges are what I generally will typically see for maybe not a super crazy lavish project.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
And next we have, in one slide you showed a rain screen being applied over the WRB. Is the rain screen the same thing as water resistive vapor permeable barrier as noted in the building code? Can
Mhm.
you talk more about the use, the necessity, and the example product for the rain screen?
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I had that video. I was watching it the other day. So, a water resistant barrier is something you will always have, and I think you should always have. You should always have probably 2 layers of it, if not bare minimum one. The rain screen is something that would go on after the water barrier. So, substrate, water barrier, and then the rain screen is an added measure of they're like there's 2 sheets of them. You'll have one installed on the water barrier, and then one installed uh, creating like a channel in between the two of them. And the biggest difference between the rain screen and the water barrier is the rain screen is funneling that water in between those 2 sheets down through the substrate in like a mini little channel, pumping it out at the bottom at the weep screen. And so if you look at, I'm happy to share the video with you, but it shows a gentleman taking a water bottle, going onto the substrate where they installed the stone in like a wainscot, and he's able to pour water onto it in case, wind or rain blows the water in there. And instead of it, getting just sitting behind the stone or sitting on it for that matter, or the mortar or whatever it may be, and getting inside, it just funnels it right through, out the back, down the middle, and out the bottom, away from any issue of freeze thaw, popping off, delaminating type deal. So that's the main difference between the two of them.
Amazing. All right. And somebody's asking if you could go back one slide.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure,
Just right
specifically
here.
why, just to, yeah, maybe just leave it there.
Yeah.
Um, but we'll move on to the next question after that one. Shouldn't a rain screen application for the exterior have a drainage plane between the lath and the sheathing, especially for wood sheathing?
hmm It should. I don't know if those cross sections didn't show it or if I didn't emphasize it enough, but yes, absolutely. It should. And that's where, unfortunately, depending on who installs or maybe what type of contractor does the work, those things can be left out or they can be overlooked or they can maybe be deemed as not, I guess, a necessity for the project. But yes, absolutely. Those should be used and they should be definitely installed. Whether it's a wood, I think you said wood sheathing or a wood substrate. Yes, those should be installed that way.
Perfect. And next we have, are there any applications where you mechanically fasten the AMSV to the substrate? And are there best practices for this application?
Yeah, great question. You know, the AMSV world for me is pretty new and in terms of brackets and having it installed in a full bed type use, I'm assuming kind of like you're talking about. I'd have to look into that. I specifically haven't seen AMSV installed in a full bed use. I've seen it primarily installed as a thin veneer. So depending on the weight, AMSV is or manufactured stone is so much lighter than a natural stone just from like those lightweight aggregates I talked about and just the fact of it, being more versatile and that's why they make it a little bit more lightweight. I'd be curious to see its weight even if a bracket was needed, if they could somehow get away with it. I'd have to look into that, but in terms of best practices, I can definitely share it with you and how it's installed and obviously the anchorings for the foundation to hold more of the structural integrity for that stone. But I'd have to look into that. I have not seen a full bed or bracket AMSV project yet. So thank you for bringing that to mind because now I'm going to look into that.
Awesome. All right. It looks like we have just one more question. The same person who asked about the wood sheathing question is
Mhm.
asking, is the drainage plane layer you just described a product with a specific name to call out?
Ooh, I've only heard like a certain brand, maybe. A specific brand I can't think of off the top of my head. I could soon right after this, but I've always just heard of rain screen is all that's the extent of it. Happy to look into that for you and get more specifics on that for a product or a reference that you can have for it.
Sweet. Sounds good. All right. Well, we'll connect you with these folks via email to get any further explanations, but that is the last question for today. We are
Okay.
about out of time. Um, so, any final comments or notes you'd like to make, Austin, before we wrap it up?
I guess again, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. And Outdoor Living Supply is nationwide, and so we are far and we have great outreach. And anything you need, both locally, domestically, or foreign for import use, we do and we source. So happy to help and answer any questions that you may have.
Awesome. Great. Well, folks, if you filled out that poll, look out for an email coming from No Reply Acelab. That'll connect you directly with Austin and his team. So you can reply to that to get any further questions answered. Yeah. Thank you, Austin, and thank you everyone for joining us. We hope you all have a great day.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you. Thanks.